and welcome to Season 2, Episode 5 of Jungian Ever After, a podcast about myths and fairy tales through the lens of Jungian analysis. I am your host, Reza, and joining me as always is my co-host and Jungian analyst, Dr. Dean Davidson. We will be discussing the Edith Hamilton version of Orpheus and Euridice. This is another well-known myth centered around a loving couple, although the bulk of the story in this one describes Orpheus's mastery of his craft and the depths of his grief.
And in this particular episode, we're really going to focus on Orpheus as the archetype of creativity. And in the next episode, we're going to kind of do a two-parter here. We'll focus on Orpheus's relationship to grief and loss.
Yes, and actually we will be using a separate story this time for that. Previously, when we've done two-parters, one of them has the story, and then the next one, you sort of have to go back and say, oh, wait, what happened again? Well, this time we'll be pairing Edith Hamilton's version with this episode, and then the Ovid version of Orpheus with the next episode. And there's some significant differences, I would say, particularly in the ending, but we won't spoil that.
And it's worth noting, and you'll hear it throughout the episode, that there are multiple versions of the Orpheus myth. So we're only giving you an example of two of them, but if you're interested, there are many different ones.
Like any of the Greek myths, I would assume, since they all got told and retold through oral tradition, there's going to be a lot of variations.
Exactly.
So before I get started, there's a section here where Orpheus is singing it. I do not have the tune, and I'm not much of a singer, so I did not attempt to sing that section. I read it like the rest, but perhaps you can imagine singing for that section. So without further ado, this is Orpheus and Euridice, as told by Edith Hamilton. The very earliest musicians were the gods. Athena was not distinguished in that line, but she invented the flute, although she never played upon it. Hermes made the lyre and gave it to Apollo, who drew from it sounds so melodious that when he played in Olympus, the gods forgot all else. Hermes also made the shepherd pipe for himself and drew enchanting music from it. Pan made the pipe of reeds, which can sing as sweetly as the nightingale in spring. The Muses had no instrument peculiar to them, but their voices were lovely beyond compare. Next in order came a few mortals so excellent in their art that they almost equaled the divine performers. Of these by far the greatest was Orpheus. On his mother's side he was more than mortal. He was the son of one of the Muses and a Thracian prince. His mother gave him the gift of music, and Thrace, where he grew up, fostered it. The Thracians were the most musical of the peoples of Greece, but Orpheus had no rival there or anywhere except the gods alone. There was no limit to his power when he played and sang. No one and nothing could resist him. In the deep, still woods upon the Thracian mountains, Orpheus with his singing lyre led the trees, led the wild beasts of the wilderness. Everything animate and inanimate followed him. He moved the rocks on the hillside and turned the course of the rivers. Little is told about his life before his ill-fated marriage, for which he is even better known than for his music. But he went on one famous expedition and proved himself a most useful member of it. He sailed with Jason on the Argo, and when the heroes were weary or the rowing was especially difficult, he would strike his lyre, and they would be aroused to fresh zeal, and their oars would smite the sea together in time to the melody. Or if a quarrel threatened, he would play so tenderly and soothingly that the fiercest spirits would grow calm and forget their anger. He saved the heroes, too, from the sirens, when they heard far over the sea singing so enchantingly sweet that it drove out all other thoughts except a desperate longing to hear more, and they turned the ship to the shore where the sirens sat. Orpheus snatched up his lyre and played a tune so clear and ringing that it drowned the sound of those lovely, fatal voices. The ship was put back on her course, and the winds sped her away from the dangerous place. If Orpheus had not been there, the Argonauts, too, would have left their bones on the Sirens' island. Where he first met and how he wooed the maiden he loved, Euridice, we are not told. But it is clear that no maiden he wanted could have resisted the power of his song. They were married, but their joy was brief. Directly after the wedding, as the bride walked in a meadow with her bridesmaids, a viper stung her, and she died. Orpheus's grief was overwhelming. He could not endure it. He determined to go down to the world of death and try to bring Eurydice back. He said to himself, "With my song I will charm Demeter's daughter. I will charm the Lord of the Dead. Moving their hearts with my melody, I will bring her away from Hades." He dared more than any other man ever dared for his love. He took the fearsome journey to the underworld. There he struck his lyre, and at the sound all that vast multitude were charmed to stillness. The dog Cerberus relaxed his guard. The wheel of Ixion stood motionless. Sisyphus sat at rest upon his stone. Tantalus forgot his thirst. For the first time the faces of the dread goddesses, the Furies, were wet with tears. The ruler of Hades drew near to listen with his queen. Orpheus sang, "O gods who rule the dark and silent world, to you all born of a woman needs must come. All lovely things at last go down to you. You are the debtor who is always paid. A little while we tarry up on earth, then we are yours forever and forever. But I seek one who came to you too soon. The bud was plucked before the flower bloomed. I tried to bear my loss, I could not bear it. Love was too strong a god. O king, you know, if that old tale men tell is true, how once the flowers saw the rape of Proserpine, then weave again for sweet Eurydice life's pattern that was taken from the loom too quickly. See, I ask a little thing, only that you will lend, not give, her to me. She shall be yours when her year's span is full." No one under the spell of his voice could refuse him anything. He drew iron tears down Pluto's cheek, and made hell grant what love did seek. They summoned Eurydice, and gave her to him, but upon one condition, that he would not look back at her as she followed him, until they had reached the upper world. So the two passed through the great doors of Hades to the path which would take them out of the darkness, climbing up and up. He knew that she must be just behind him, but he longed unutterably to give one glance to make sure. But now they were almost there. The blackness was turning gray. Now he had stepped out joyfully into the daylight. Then he turned to her. It was too soon. She was still in the cavern. He saw her in the dim light, and he held out his arms to clasp her, but on the instant she was gone. She had slipped back into the darkness. All he heard was one faint word, "Farewell." Desperately he tried to rush after her and follow her down, but he was not allowed. The gods would not consent to his entering the world of the dead a second time while he was still alive. He was forced to return to the earth alone, in utter desolation. Then he forsook the company of men. He wandered through the wild solitudes of Thrace, comfortless except for his lyre, playing, always playing. and the rocks and the rivers and the trees heard him gladly, his only companions. But at last a band of Maenads came upon him. They were as frenzied as those who killed Pentheus so horribly. They slew the gentle musician, tearing him limb from limb, and flung the severed head into the swift river Hebrus. It was borne along past the river's mouth on to the Lesbian shore, nor had it suffered any change from the sea when the Muses found it and buried it in the sanctuary of the island. His limbs they gathered and placed in a tomb at the foot of Mount Olympus, and there to this day the nightingales sing more sweetly than anywhere else.
Orpheus was half human and half muse, and he brought the capacity to make art to humanity. And his story tells us much about the archetypal power of that gift.
So it was very interesting when we were prepping for this episode to hear you describe the story in that way, because my knowledge of the story and immediate reaction to the story is always reading it as less like a Prometheus-esque story and more about tragedy and loss.
Which I think is a huge emphasis of the Orpheus and Euridice story.
Sure.
Once Eurydice comes into the story, the emphasis is on tragedy and loss and the response or lack of response to that. But there's a lot of the Orpheus story that's about the human capacity for creativity. Orpheus was the archetypal poet and singer. He was inseparable from his golden lyre, which is a gift from Apollo. His mother was the muse of poetry, Calliope. He was the first mortal to have a stringed instrument, and he had the gift of bringing music and poetry together. So music and storytelling come together in the archetype of Orpheus.
Which I think was a very common pairing in old times. I'm sure parts of Homer might have been...
Were definitely sung, yes.
And I'm familiar with the Norse skalds who definitely would sing these great epic poems of Norse mythology. So I think it's a common delivery method for these older grand stories of poetry. And I do wonder, with modern day songs, they do rhyme, but I don't know if that's considered the same, or I've always been a bit vague on sort of what makes a piece of writing understood as poetry.
I have no idea, but I would say rap is a really powerful example in current times of a place where people are bringing story and music together and how impactful that bringing together is.
I wonder if it's one of those things where poetry just means something different to different people. And so maybe a classics major would not see poetry the same way as musicians and such.
That could be, yeah. So the first great opera, Orfeo, or Orpheus, by Monteverdi, was first performed in 1607, shortly followed by an opera about Eurydice. It's evidence of the energy and pull of the archetypal pattern of Orpheus that he inspired a brand new art form, opera, thousands of years after his story was first told. The myth of Orpheus continues to tell us the story of our own creative capacities.
It's kind of curious to me that there were two separate operas for Orpheus and Eurydice. I guess it shouldn't be that surprising since we are sort of breaking this up into two different episodes. Perhaps the themes are similarly dispersed there, where Eurydice is the tragedy and grief and loss, and perhaps the Orpheus part is more about...
I think Monteverdi's Orpheus is very much actually about the tragedy as well. So
I wonder what's the distinguishing aspect then.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with the Eurydice opera. Opera's not my general form of music, although I find this one quite powerful.
Certainly you could make a separation off of perspective. If one is through Orpheus's perspective and one is through Eurydice, we'll get into that next episode, how those could be very, very different perspectives.
Yeah, very much so. We'll get into it next episode. So let's go back to Orpheus and creativity. Orpheus's unique ability enchanted the woodland of Parnassus. Nothing and no one could resist Orpheus's music. He could transform the evil thoughts of people, move stones, and enchant plants and flowers. Orpheus's power gives us a glimpse of the archetypal power of creativity and beauty. Bringing creative energy to our, quote, evil thoughts, our stuck anger, grief, self-loathing, etc., is often the only way to transform those patterns. We can medicate them away. We can find ways of easing the symptoms, perhaps find ways to live by avoiding these parts of psyche. But to truly transform them, we must engage in a creative process.
And that's why something like art therapy exists and can be so effective.
Absolutely. Because it's nonverbal, it brings a new story into psyche. It immediately taps into that creative, transformative potential. Jung and his followers had and continue to have our analysans draw, dance, create images in the sand, etc., to access our unconscious capacities for transformation. Jung himself drew and painted many of his dreams, visions, and nightmares. And if you're interested in those drawings and paintings, I invite you to look at the images in Jung's Red Book.
Are those done by Jung himself or by his clients?
Those are done by Jung himself. There are other places where some of his analysans works are available to see, but in the Red Book, it's all Jung's work.
And that's something that people might be able to just find searching the web.
Yes. I believe that the creativity involved in coming to deeply understand a dream is one of the most direct and powerful processes we have available to transform our evil or harmful thoughts.
Although, of course, the first step is to be willing to take on that work.
To even see that those thoughts or those patterns are harmful as opposed to somebody else's fault. That's really the first step. So what do we make of Orpheus's power to move stones and enchant plants?
I don't really know about the moving stones bit, but isn't there some study about playing music to plants to improve their growth?
Yeah, I think they contrasted how well plants grew if you played classical music versus if you played heavy metal. And then plants grew better to all music and best to classical music, is my memory of that study. Somebody Google it, correct us if we're wrong.
Or if it's dated.
Or if it's dated, exactly. Again, I would look at this intrapsychically. What's going on in our psyches? The stones are our stony, immovable places, and the plants and flowers symbolize our green, growing places. Creative work can soften the psychological stone, the stuckness, and support the growth of inner sprouts and flowers, the places where things are moving and growing and giving birth. Orpheus's gift enchanted the woodland of Parnassus, which is actually a mountain in Greece. Mountaintops were sacred to the gods. Orpheus lived at the base of Parnassus, and nothing could resist his music. He enchanted plants, flowers, trees would bend over to listen to his music. He could transform the thoughts of mortals, change their dispositions. His music could turn people's thoughts to worshiping the gods. This part of the myth really points out the role of the artist. Art, in this case music and poetry, links the conscious and unconscious. He is the personification of the power of music and poetry. This link can soften our stony parts, waters our inner garden, and opens the path to individuation. So just to clarify that a little bit, and to bring it back to dream work, it is the place where conscious and unconscious come together and blur together that transformation happens. And that is a place that art opens us up to. And in dream work, we bring our conscious self to the products of the unconscious. So they're very closely linked, I think, in that way. And both really powerful for transformation because of that connection between conscious and unconscious.
Yeah, I definitely had a period in college where I feel like my art was very important, not just because it was part of my education, but because I was working through a lot of stuff. But as creative processes have become more a part of my hobbies, but also at times something I'd be interested in pursuing as a career, there's definitely times when creative work can begin to feel cumbersome over time if it's forced. So there was a period where I went to all kinds of conventions selling jewelry.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
And it was great at the conventions, and I did a lot of made-to-order things at those events. I would go back to my hotel room and be making orders that people ordered on one day to give them the next day. But in terms of when I was at home, just trying to build up a supply was a lot harder to get motivated. But more recently, sort of last year, I got into Dungeons and Dragons, not just as a player where you're just sort of participating, but there's not extra work, but as the person who runs the game, the dungeon master or game master. And I found that the way in which I could engage with that creativity and everything, it just doesn't tire me out. I had so many times where, whether I was designing for the game or just I would be taking care of my daughter, and like while we're at the Children's Museum, I'm just running through my mind of, okay, I can tie this aspect of this person's story to this part of the adventure. And, you know, even if I get behind sometimes because life gets in the way, as, you know, it always does, we have obligations, the extent to which I enjoy it is so great that it never feels like work.
And I wonder if it doesn't feel like work because there's something about the nature of your connection to your unconscious. I mean, just as you're describing that walking through the museum and having ideas come up, they're coming up from somewhere. Dungeons and Dragons becomes the vehicle to connect to these deep places in yourself of new ideas and new stories. Jung argues that man has the possibility of participating in cosmic harmony through the development of consciousness. Consciousness develops through listening to our dreams, experiences of art, music, and storytelling, opening ourselves to creative expression. And I think that's exactly what's happening as you describe what you're doing with the Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, and part of what's so exciting to me about D&D specifically, even though I had all these artistic pursuits over the course of my life, is that it's collaborative storytelling. I have a vague sense of the overarching plot points, but I don't actually know what my friends, the players, are going to do. So there's this back and forth at the table where I have to improvise a lot. And it's particularly fun when someone realizes that I've tied some aspect of their character's backstory that they wrote, and without knowing to what extent it would get used. But those moments emphasize the collaboration. And I think that's where it becomes a source of meaning for players. It's what makes it all come alive into more than just a game.
Yeah, I think a really good D&D group is a process of creating an ongoing myth. And that's why it continues to be played decades after its introduction. Back to Orpheus, in an early part of the Orpheus myth, he sailed with Jason and the Argonauts to capture the Golden Fleece. The Golden Fleece was Jason's birthright, which was stolen, and he had to undergo a hero's journey to recapture it. Orpheus's role, or one of his roles, was to help keep the rowers in rhythm and to prevent quarrels among the sailors.
Back when we had sailors who used sailboats or ships, they would have had a shantyman who would lead songs for the crew and to row in time and keep their spirits up. We
had a resurgence of sea shanties kind of during COVID times, or maybe a little bit before, music-wise. But of course, all our ships are
powered by engines, not people.
Right.
But work songs,
yes,
are an archetypal form.
Yeah. Never had to deal with fending off sirens, though.
Literally, but perhaps psychologically, we'll see. Again, this is symbolic of the power of art to keep us moving towards our personal treasure. And our treasure is becoming whole and truly ourselves. Just as listening to music can bring a room full of people into a shared rhythm, so can our internal music bring us into rhythm with ourselves. A work song can make hard physical labor easier and can help a group of people work in unison. Our internal work song can make our psychological work easier and more powerful. And I was wondering, what songs or music function this way for us? And what is it about those particular songs or genres?
So yeah, I wouldn't narrow it down to a single song, because I feel like usually tasks are longer than that. So unless you're going to listen to one song on repeat, you need sort of a broader playlist there. But I definitely have genres that I use for certain tasks. And the two main ones are that if I'm doing something physically taxing, I prefer faster, kind of more up-tempo electronic music. And then if I need to focus, like if I'm competing in a tournament of Hearthstone, that card game, or if I just want to remain calm, fall asleep, then I listen to Enya.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, actually, those shanty songs, if I'm gardening or doing something physical, it still works. Patti Smith and The Clash, if I need courage or I need to connect to my righteous anger. Bluegrass will get me dancing. Jonathan Richman gives me a window into love. The song Wayfaring Stranger connects me immediately to the beauty and peace of death. Spirituals, hymns, Jewish sacred chant open a bridge to the divine.
You made me think of one more, which is I often have a sort of playlist specifically for kind of embracing sadness, right?
Mm-hmm.
It may seem strange, but sometimes I'm just sort of like, I'm feeling down and I just want to exist in that rather than try and
pull yourself
shut
out
it
of
down.
It.
Right.
Yeah.
And so those tend to be things that remind me of my dad or are sad in other ways. There's a song by the band Perry called If I Die Young that is particularly sad, and loads of others. And those are not necessarily similar in genre, just somber in tone.
My mom is very, very slowly dying of dementia. And so at this point, visiting with her is really just sitting in the room with her. And I have started bringing out my Spotify, and I do tend to listen to songs that are in the minor key, right? It's just helps me connect to the sadness. Yeah.
Yeah.
On a lighter note, this podcast is an expression of my creativity. This is a place where I can connect the stuff that I think about and that I feel deeply, and I can put it into words and then connect it to the outer world. And for me, that's an example of that unconscious and conscious link, which is the source of creativity.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of this is informative for me. It's learning about this different way of looking at these myths or fairy tales and things, because I do have more of a layperson perspective, I guess, or pop culture perspective, depending on the thing. Certainly with the Grimm's fairy tales, there's a lot of pop culture stuff surrounding those because Disney, but a little bit less so with Greek, although there are some things. I think it's just, I love myths and fairy tales so much, and I shouldn't have been surprised that I would enjoy. I was always intimidated by being the game master, right? But I shouldn't be surprised that I enjoy it because I just love stories.
Right. That's what we both share. And I think the podcast is a chance to bring those stories, both how they work on us and how they might work on a larger outside world, which is an exciting process for me. Again, back to our myth. We alluded to Orpheus saving the Argonauts from the Sirens, which he does as they're rowing towards the Golden Fleece. He is able to drown out their beautiful but poisonous music. We all have a siren song or songs that pull us away from our true work, but are so enchanting that we will throw ourselves overboard temporarily or permanently.
I would equate the sirens to our vices or addictions. They're things that we have trouble resisting. It's really easy for me, and I think many of my generation, to end up playing a board game, watching TV, scrolling on social media.
I was going to say that, right? I'm not sure that a board game is an addiction.
Well, sorry, did I say board game? Video game.
Ah, okay.
The stuff that you can easily access and do, and it can take up a lot of time.
But leads you nowhere.
It's not to say that I don't have some fulfillment on completing certain story-based video games, at least for me. That at least I feel like it's more an interactive story, right? Like reading a book. But even reading a book can sometimes get in the way of the other stuff you have to do to be productive.
As I don't remember which one of my teachers, but one of my teachers said anything can function defensively. Anything can be valuable, and anything can also pull us off our true work, which is always something that's going to contribute to individuation. And I think even drugs and alcohol can function that way.
Sure.
They can have value in opening us to something new, and they can completely numb us and close us off to anything important or valuable.
Right. I probably was the only kid in my class in elementary school to get in trouble for having a book and reading it during some assembly.
I did too. I was so bored in grade school in particular that I would have a book inside the textbook. And I would get caught and get in trouble regularly.
There was some kind of, I don't know, sports-related assembly where there was a group performing, and I'm like, I'm not interested in this. Let me read my high fantasy novel.
And here we are reading our high fantasy novels to the broader public. So one of my siren songs is perfectly articulated by Margaret Atwood in her poem, Siren Song. This is the one song everyone would like to learn, the song that is irresistible, the song that forces men to leap overboard in squadrons, even though they see the beached skulls. The song nobody knows, because anyone who has heard it is dead and the others can't remember. Shall I tell you the secret? And if I do, will you get me out of this bird suit? I don't enjoy it here, squatting on this island, looking picturesque and mythical, with these two feathery maniacs. I don't enjoy singing this trio, fatal and valuable. I will tell the secret to you, only to you. Come closer. This song is a cry for help. Help me. Only you can. You are unique. At last, alas, it is a boring song, but it works every time.
This is such a different perspective for me on the sirens, because I feel like they're always described as beautiful in song, if not appearance, though sometimes in appearance. I think mermaids are the continuation of that myth. The mermaids draw away sailors to their death. And here, it's not that the song is beautiful. It's a boring song, but it taps into that fact that we all want to be unique. We want to feel special at being the person who can help. And that is its own intoxicating idea.
I totally agree. And I have shared this poem with I don't know how many therapists, and every one of them has been like, oh my goodness, that explains something so important about me and about where I might go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
When I start to think it's me, only me, who can help, I can know I'm off track.
Right.
And I'm going to be allegorically throwing myself to my my doom.
Yeah. It is where you start going into the territory of some of the other topics we've discussed in terms of inflated ego.
Right, exactly. And the savior complex.
Right.
Yeah, so it's interesting that for Margaret Atwood, it's the savior complex that is the siren song.
Yeah.
So eventually Jason gets to the fleece, and it's at the top of a tree guarded by a dragon. The golden fleece in this story is a symbol for our heart's desire, for completion. And it's guarded by a dragon, our shadow, our anger, our fear, our greed, that must be overtaken. Dragons in the Western tradition often symbolize pointless greed. They kill for and guard treasure they cannot use.
I always can't help myself when thinking about Western dragons. They just remind me of the billionaire class. And it is an amount of wealth that evolutionarily is challenging for us to wrap our heads around. We are not developed to deal with numbers that big. When we hear that the deficit is some trillions of dollars, like, it's meaningless. At a certain point,
For sure.
we just say number big. And that's all it means. It's tough to recognize that a millionaire has more in common with a homeless person than they do with a billionaire. That is the scale difference. And most billionaires, even ones that we know maybe do good things like Bill Gates, right? Most achieve it and protect that wealth through uncaring means. And they will never come close to spending it. You could maybe argue that Beyonce and Taylor Swift recently hit like the billion mark. And that is through a lot of hard work and their own creativity and probably good investing in licensing deals and things. And perhaps there's no exploitation going on there. But certainly when it comes to our multi-billionaires,
Our oligarchs.
yeah, someone is losing out. And it is generally only through uncaring means that you can achieve wealth that is that vast. And it won't be spent by you or generations of your offspring.
Right. So it really has that dragonish quality of cruelty and pointlessness.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lovely example of how we really do live in the archetypes.
Yeah.
Right? There's the dragon archetype, and here we keep living it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Luckily for Jason and his quest, Orpheus is around, and he is able to put the dragon to sleep. This, for me, symbolizes that the creative force can calm the shadow. Not eradicate the shadow, but calm it. While the dragon sleeps, Jason can get the fleece. The creative process allows us access to our most valuable treasure.
I'm reminded of listening to Enya to sort of quiet my anxieties so that I can sleep. I don't know if my anxieties are as big as a dragon, but certainly they can.
But at
get
3
in the
a.m,
way.
they can probably feel pretty shadow-like.
Yes.
In one version of the myth, when Orpheus goes into the underworld in search of Eurydice, he comes across Sisyphus in Sisyphus's personal hell. Sisyphus is pushing his huge rock up a steep mountain. When the rock gets to the top of the mountain, it immediately rolls back to the bottom. Sisyphus then exhaustedly walks back down the mountain and starts painfully and laboriously pushing his rock up to the top again. This continues for eternity. When Orpheus comes into the land of the dead, he sees Sisyphus and feels deep sympathy for him. Orpheus stops and plays a tune. Sisyphus is able, while listening to the music, to simply put down the rock and appreciate the beauty.
That telling demonstrates the true power of Orpheus's music. I mean, we've described a lot of pretty incredible things, but Sisyphus is compelled by the gods to perform this task repeatedly. It's his punishment. So it's not just he chooses to stop because of the music's beauty, as though like just distracted, but the curse, or whatever we want to call this punishment, is temporarily lifted to give him this reprieve, which is no small feat to dispel the magic of the gods, even temporarily.
This story about Sisyphus seems to me to symbolize the ability of art to get us out of our obsessions. Obsessions don't feel like we have a choice. They feel like a curse.
Mm-hmm.
When we are truly moved by art, we can see, at least momentarily, that our repetitive, compulsive actions are unnecessary. We can put down our personal rock and just notice the beauty. In my own life, I can give the example of my relationship with breaking news. I know that repeatedly checking is unhealthy for me. It leads to more agitation, fear, and upset, and does not empower me in any way to take action that might help anyone. And yet, I often find myself compulsively checking. And it is also true for me that music and other great art can restore me to sanity, at least for a while.
Yeah. I am totally immersed in the news as a defensive mechanism. But thinking about Sisyphus in the version that we read, there's some other characters mentioned, but I think Sisyphus and Cerberus are kind of the most well-known amongst those who dwell in Hades and Tartarus. So Cerberus, what would Cerberus represent?
So Cerberus, the three-headed dog, has the job of constantly guarding the gates of the underworld. I think this could represent our hypervigilance, the way we may constantly be looking for danger. Cerberus is like the protector part of Psyche, whose job it is to keep our vulnerable true self safe. But that part can become overactive, never resting, never letting us rest, and seeing danger where there is none. Again, great art can give this part of Psyche a chance to let down its guard and rest for a bit. This can allow all of Psyche, our whole selves, to experience some equanimity and perhaps even allow the voice of reason to speak to us rather than just the danger, 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 danger part of ourselves.
And again, I'm reminded of that need I have sometimes to play Enya through my sleep mask earphones just to fall asleep at night, because otherwise my mind may be just too busy of thinking
hypervigilanting.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that covers the creative parts of the Orpheus story, and like we said, we'll get into more of the specifics of Orpheus and Eurydice together in the next portion where we'll read from Ovid. Before I get into the regular closing lines of the show, we wanted to recommend a YouTube video. Someone named Charles Souza, I don't know them, but they have posted Claudio Monteverdi's L'Orfeo. And what's special about this one is that they have actually gone in and done English translation. So normally when I experience opera, which admittedly is not frequently, but occasionally, it's in another language, often Italian. And so while beautiful, I don't understand what they're saying. This video has the English translation in the subtitles, so you can get the full experience. I'm including that link in the description for today's episode so that you can go out and experience that for yourself, because we want you to open yourself to the possibilities of experiencing great art. But without further ado, our intro-outro music is a sample of Seculos Epitaph with the Lyre of Apollo by Lina Palera under an attribution non-commercial share-alike 3.0 international license. You can find the full version at freemusicarchive.org, link in the description. And if you like what you've been hearing, please leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcast feed of choice. This really helps other people find the show. This show will always be free and available to all, but if you would like to monetarily support the show, you can do so at ko-fi.com/JungianEverAfter. Also, Dr. Adina Davidson is a certified Jungian analyst who offers telesessions and case consultation. You can find out more about her practice at adinadavidson.com or her Psychology Today profile. We'll be with you again next time, but until then, we hope your days are filled with exploring the worlds of imagination and storytelling.